The basic aim of this particular short video, this chapter 5, is to demonstrate how, if you're armed with ICRFS-Plus, that includes the modeling wizard, and also the A.M. Best Schedule T data, you have access to a lot of information in a matter of minutes, not just a few mouse clicks, and it could also give your company a competitive edge. So you'll be able to compare your company to other companies. You'll be able to compare your company to the industry. Now you might remember that in chapter 4, in the 4th video, we discussed the COM automation, which I will review in a moment. We also discussed the fact that if you've got the NIC Schedule P data or the A.M. Best Schedule P data, you can easily convert it to an ICRFS relational database by name of company, by line of business, what other variables there are in the Schedule P database. So if I go to Home and I look at the page which has to do with COM automation, let's just review some of the benefits. The COM automation, I guess, helps you or allows you to write Visual Basic script in Excel to tell the product what to do. So, for instance, you could run the modeling wizard on every triangle group and every triangle and every triangle group in the database, so you can select which triangles. It might be just the paid losses. It could be the number of claims reported. It could be the cases of estimates. You run the modeling wizard from outside on all the objects in the database that you'd like to do that on. You can also, as mentioned earlier, you can import large amounts of data from any other application. So you might have all your triangles warehoused in MS Access, or maybe warehoused in Microsoft Excel. Then you can convert that particular database into an ICRFS relational database in one fell swoop. You can also customize and automate report writing. You can communicate directly with any other software. So you could take any output, export any output out of ICRFS into any other software seamlessly by just writing some Visual Basic script in Excel. Okay, and the other thing, of course, you can do is just update the whole database automatically with all the models. The data seamlessly are updated from your other application where the data might be warehoused initially, like MS Access. All this can be automated. So now let's look at, in chapter 5 we did look at, was it chapter 5 or 4? Let me just check. Let's go back. That was the demonstrations. So in chapter 4, I think it was. Yeah, in chapter 4, we looked at the NIC Schedule P, and we studied a number of companies. Now we are going to look at the A.M. Best, and here it is. Let's go to the top of the list, and there's a number of variables in the database. Let's look at the variables list. There's line of business, company name, A.M. Best company number, aggregation code, A.M. Best group, federal employee, whatever. Okay, triangle. So if we open up the tree by line of business, for instance, we can go to D, which is workers' compensation. All these triangle groups, the line of business is workers' compensation. If we go to T, reinsurance C, well, all these triangle groups have that particular attribute in terms of line of business. We can go back to D and try and open the database, say, by company name. In other words, drill down further by company name. Well, that's ACE Employers Insurance Company, Aegon, Admiral, and so on. I mean, we could conduct a search in a kind of slightly different way. We could go to, say, company name and select a particular company, Well, it doesn't have that many triangle groups, so we can always look at line of business and just look at that particular list. Of course, we can also open the tree by line of business. We do that, and we can select commercial auto or commercial multi-peril. Another way of finding something is submitting a query. So we could go, for instance, to the query tab, go to company name, double click, and type in the first few letters of the company, Acuity. So that comes up, and then we could search by line of business, but there aren't that many triangle groups under Acuity, so the rest of the search would be pretty straightforward. So let's go back to the tree view. Why don't we go and select workers' comp? So let's go to line of business, D, and we're going to select the number of companies. The first one is Acuity, which is ACU, and there it is. We open that up, and then we go back to the database, and incidentally, everything I'm doing now, it could be actually done with COM outside for the whole database. All the functions I'm performing now can be done with Visual Basic Script in Excel. You run it overnight, and it'll be run over the whole database. The next company I'm going to select is Company C. Now, I've hidden the name of the company because it's under reserved. It's woefully under reserved, and we're going to prove that. The next company will be Travelers. Travelers Excess Surplus. We've got 3 companies. Let's go to total. Now, AM Best has different types of totals. Totals by agency, direct. Let's look at industry. Total US PC industry. So now we tile vertically, so we just look at the triangle groups. We go to the first triangle group, which is Acuity. Go to PTF, run the wizard. Turns out with this one, the wizard actually generates a number of models, as you would have seen in previous demonstrations. In this particular case, I've looked at this more closely earlier. M4 is better. Let's go to Company C, run PTF, the wizard. Then we look at Travelers, PTF, run the wizard. And then the last one is Total US, PTF, run the wizard. Okay, tile vertically, minimize the regression tables. Let's close the residual graphs so we don't have too much clutter, and just look at the model displays by calendar year for each. Okay, so what do we know? For total US PC industry, the trend is 6%, and it's there for at least 9 years. For Travelers Excess, it's much less. It's 3.77 plus minus 1.15. For Acuity, they have a slight problem in terms of trend. It doesn't mean they're necessarily under-reserved, but they do have a problem because all of a sudden there's a change from about 5% to 17%. Incidentally, for each triangle group, what exposure measure did I use? I used the reported number of claims in the first development year, development year 0. So these trends kind of represents the cost per unit number of claims reported. Yet for this company C, the trend is huge. It's 12% over a 9-year period. So you can see, first of all, that each company is different in terms of trends, and each company is different to the industry. What about process variability? Usually the process variability in the industry would be the lowest. So you can see we're looking at 4.5 e to the minus 3, 2.5 e to the minus 3 around there. For Travelers, well, let's not choose Travelers because that's also pretty low. Let's look at Company C. You can see the process variability is much higher. Acuity, much higher than the industry, but less than, well, for some development years, it's less than Company Z, and travelers, it's also amazingly low, but still higher than that of the industry. Now let's go back to the trend structure. Incidentally, for travelers, even though they have a relatively low trend along their calendar years, they do have some major shift along their accident years. For acuity, a tiny drop, but a major trend change along the calendar years. And for company C, there's a 44% increase between accident years 96 and 97, and the calendar year trend there 12% for long period. And the industry, let's go back to industry at 6%. Let's look at the industry. What does the industry have to do each year? Each year, it updates its triangle. There's a new calendar year, plus there's a new accident year. So it has to reserve for a new accident year each year, but it also pays for the current calendar year. What should it do to its premium each year, to its price? It should increase it by at least 6%, because the calendar year trend of 6% projects onto the accident years and the development years, and that's an axiom that you would have learned in earlier videos, and also you would have learned if you read the paper Best Estimates for Reserves. Now, what I've done here in, I guess the calculations were actually done in a spreadsheet, but I'll display this in a PowerPoint file. What I've done is I have created, let me bring up the pointer. I have created, I don't like that pointer. I have created deterministic data on a log scale for accident year W, development year D. The level is 10 minus 0.3 by development year, so 30% decay. The cell in accident year W in delay D, the corresponding calendar year is W plus D. So the number of calendar years since the first is W plus D minus 1, and you multiply that by the 5%. So in the data I've just created, deterministic data, I've got a 30% decay along the development years, a 5% calendar year trend that we know manifests in the other two directions, accident year and development year. So this is a situation of the reserves and the ultimates as at year end 2004, using this deterministic data, and we're assuming that there's a complete runoff by development year 5. So these are the reserves, and these are the estimates. These are not estimates, are the real true ultimates. Everything is deterministic. At the end of year 2005, we had another calendar year. The reserves obviously reduced, but then we have to reserve for 2005, and you'll notice probably that the estimates of the ultimates have not changed, but this could easily be seen more clearly if we look at these summary tables. Reserves and ultimates in 2004 are the same as they are as 2005, because we are reserving along the 5% trend line. You notice that the estimates of ultimates, or ultimates from year to year, underwriting year, accident year to accident year, same thing, increased by 5%. But so have the total reserves. Even though you had another calendar year that you pay for, and you have to reserve for another accident year, it's not that intuitive that the total reserves should also go up by 5%. But they do. And what's the simple proof for that? A simple algebraic geometric proof. If that's your triangle, and you are at the end of the calendar year 2004, the reserve is the discrete area of this triangle here, the sum of all the paid losses and all the cells, and that's called that triangle A. Next year, at the end of 2005, the reserves will be represented by the discrete area of the bottom triangle, triangle B. Now, for every cell in triangle A, there's a number directly below it. There's a cell directly below it in the next accident year, same development year, which corresponds to that cell. But the number in the cell below it is 5% larger, because the calendar year trend projects along the accident years. So for every number in A, there's a corresponding number in B, which is 5% higher. So the sum of the numbers in B exceed are 5% larger than the sum of the numbers in A. So reserves at end of 2005 are 5% higher than the reserves, total reserves, and I don't call that a reserve upgrade. I just call that your reserves reflect your costs, and so does your price. Each year you increase your price by 5%, and your reserves basically reflect your costs, and as you do the updating each year, you maintain consistent estimates of prior year ultimates. So if we were to look at Company C, let me close all regression tables and just go back to Company C. And run the model. Let's just test for some stability. Let's remove the last 3 years and see how the answers change. We've done this before for other studies. This is called validation analysis. And you can see that as you remove years, if anything happens, the trends slightly go up. So there's a little bit of evidence, and more recently the trends are slightly lower. But these answers are pretty consistent. If we do the forecasting to get the reserving table, there's the forecast summary, and that's by accident year. Why don't we look at the reserves that the company actually holds? And I have in previously calculated the reserves triangle from these two triangles, case reserve estimates and bulk and IBNR. Let's do it again. In fact, let me highlight that and aggregate, and let's call that reserves 1. Because I've done it before and I've called it reserves 1. And now if I open this table and change the view of this triangle, which represents the reserves held by the company, and let's just close any display that I don't need. And so we want to compare these numbers with these ones. So we're comparing the 3.181 with 3.9, the 2.0 with 2.2, the 1.2 with 2.5. The sum of these numbers is 7.716, and yet we have a number which is around 13 million. Now, I would be very hesitant to actually change the trend going forward. So if I go back to my model, I've got a trend, a calendar year trend of 11.57 plus minus 3%. So I'm assuming that in the future the true trend is a random number from a normal distribution with mean 11.57% and a standard deviation of 3%. That's all include my calculations. I am in fact including parameter uncertainty. And I was also doing that in the pricing studies in the previous chapter 4, where we included both parameter uncertainty, process variability, process correlations between the triangles, between the layers, and also parameter correlations in obtaining various distributions and calculating various distributions. Now, so what about if I forecast, and I'm going to be extremely optimistic and assume that the trend will drop to 0? Well, I'll have an estimate, let's just look in the logbook, of 8.7 million, and the standard deviation of the reserve distribution is 2.6 million. So that's already higher than the company's holding. And of course, it wouldn't make sense if this was even the true mean, which it can't possibly be. It's very unlikely that in the future we're going to have a trend of 0. But even if this was the mean, and the company reserves the mean each year, then it's pretty well known, it's a probabilistic result developed by de Moivre about 200 years ago, that if you always use the mean as your price, or always reserve the mean, the probability of ultimate ruin is 1. So, you always need to reserve more than the mean, even though the mean might be higher than the 50th percentile. Now, are there any indications using ratio methods that would lead the company to produce such low numbers? And I think there are. So if we now go to the paid losses cumulative, here, let me just expand that a bit, and we go to ELOF, where we calculate the volume weighted averages, which this is just really the MAC model, which doesn't work for, I'd say, 99.99999% of triangles. Now, if you look at the residuals versus the calendar years, it can't work. That's a very simple mathematical proof of that. You'll see that there's they're changing trends, and by and large, there's a bit of a calendar year trend overall, and the observations are a bit skewed. The ones that are above zero are further away from zero than the ones that are below. You're underfitting a lot of the accident years here, and that suggests that you'll get an answer that's a bit low because you're not capturing some of the trends in the data. The trends in the methods are lower than the trends in the data. So if we look at the logbook now, we get 6.7 million. Now, if you want to see if this method's got any predictive power, you'll find out that very often you need an intercept, but apart from that, that doesn't look linear to me. It looks, in fact, like two lines. Over there, there's no correlation. Over here, there is. By and large, there is correlation. So ratios have some predictive power, some predictive power, some predictive power, some predictive power. But here, from, say, 5 to 4, there's no predictive power. If I close ELOF and I go to the incurred data, you'll see again that if you use volume-weighted averages, you're not capturing the trend in the data. And you're really underfitting all these accident years. And again, there's sort of two linear functions in my view. I think from, say, development year 2 to 3, there's no predictive power, there is predictive power, there's no predictive power, and so on. And when you do the forecast, you still get an answer that's slightly lower than what I think it should be. I mean, how can we get 10 million? We can always go back to PTF. And now when we do the forecasting, what if we change the trend? In fact, let me estimate the model again so that I can see in the forecast dialog box what was the trend. And why don't we change it, say, to 7% plus minus 3 of uncertainty in that trend. What kind of answer do we get? We'll get 11. So, the trend has got to be a little bit lower in order to get a number which is around 10. But the company didn't reserve 10. The company reserves 7 more. So there's very strong evidence that the company is woefully under-reserved. It's also not reserving along this trend line. In other words, it's not increasing its total reserves each year by 10%. 11, 12%. My guess, it's also not increasing its net prices by 11 or 12% a year. All right, so where's the competitive advantage? If your company, as the one that has the trend of 12%, and Travelers has a trend of 3%, then you need to increase your total reserves by 11 or 12%. You need to increase your price by that. Travelers doesn't have to do that. It's riding a better mix of risks. It doesn't have to do that. And it can remain competitive by not increasing the price the way you would, the way this company, C, would. Okay. On the other hand, if you're Travelers and you're looking at company C, which is a competitors of yours, well, you know that they need to increase their premium, their price. They need to increase their total reserves from year to year. You don't have to. So, the mix of risk you're riding, you should be quite happy with. All right, and this is the way you can gain a lot of competitive advantage. You can get better understanding of what's going on in your company vis-a-vis other companies.